have all of these things telling us how to eat, how to live our lives, how to exercise, and our health has done nothing but get worse.
100 years ago, there was almost no chronic disease.
Over a 20-year span, no increase in calories, moderate increase in exercise, and yet obesity rates 30% to 42%.
So there has to be something else in the environment.
It's in almost all processed foods.
Recommended by our public health authorities in ever-increasing amounts.
And with that has come this explosion of overweight, obesity, and chronic disease.
News that the president had suffered a heart attack was flashed to the world on September 24th, 1955.
In 1955, President Eisenhower had a heart attack.
America was plagued with uncertainty.
The attention of the nation was 100% focused on President Eisenhower and what caused heart disease. Nobody knew.
There were so many things that all came together at the right times to create an atmosphere of belief in this hypothesis that animal fats and saturated animal fat were the enemy.
Everybody from the World Health Organization to the American Cancer Society has said, don't eat so much processed meats, don't eat so much red meats.
Red meat, especially beef and pork, or increased risk of colon cancer.
Red meat is bad. People should just stay away from processed meat, stay away from red meat.
Stop eating.
Stop eating! Stop eating! Stop eating! Stop eating that damn
red meat! This is red meat, full of fat.
Should we just stop eating meat?
So our public health system really is a disaster. They've done things like vilify saturated fat, vilify cholesterol, and confuse the whole subject. If you think about the Maasai warriors of Kenya and Tanzania, their diet is milk, meat, and blood, and it's 66% animal fat. It's the highest animal fat diet in the world. That's 40 to 46% saturated animal fat, and yet virtually they had no heart disease, they had no diabetes, they had no obesity.
This science is not unknown. It has just been silenced.
So there has to be something else in the environment.
What we're being told to eat is at the heart of our problem.
It's the late 1800s, and people across America are obsessed with meat.
Meat and eggs help the body grow and make it strong. Meat is good for you. Meats and eggs are high in protein, which helps build red blood and strong muscles.
Look at any menu and you'll see noisette de ville, beef bourguignon, smoked ox tongue, all covered in creamy sauces and lots of butter. Animal fats were the main source of fats in the American diet. Back then, eating meat was a status symbol. Actually, for all of human history, eating meat was a status symbol. If you're the hunter of the group and you came back with the kill, you'd get the best bite of the meat. The king would get the best bite, while the peasants had to live off things like grain. For all human history, if you had meat, you'd eat it. And if you didn't, you'd do whatever you could to find it.
Early 1900s, all the fat we ate was tallow and lard, probably from pigs that are raised way better than they're raised today, and butter. That was all the animal fat that we got. And we ate meat when we could get it. Like if you could afford meat in the early 1900s, you ate that meat.
And guess what? Since everyone was eating meat, they were actually pretty healthy. They were pretty slim. And oh, would you look at that? Heart disease was almost non-existent. Obesity was almost non-existent. Diabetes was almost non-existent. In fact, most of the modern ailments you see today were totally non-existent, even though everyone was eating plenty of unhealthy red meat. But then came the industrial age. Factories were popping up in every state. People started moving out of their sleepy countryside homes and taking jobs as factory workers in the big city. And in these factories, they were making all kinds of new products, like plastic combs, mass production clothing that left mountains of cotton seeds behind, and animal feed made of soybean and corn. And guess what? When the dried soybeans and corn would get crushed, a liquid oil would collect at the bottom of the vat. So what did these industrialists do with it? Well, not wanting to waste this perfectly good oil, these industrialists wanted to see what else they could use all this soybean, cottonseed, and corn oil for. They definitely couldn't eat these oils. They were incredibly toxic. For example, cottonseed oil contains a chemical called gossypol. that is so toxic to male fertility that it's used today in China as male birth control, while also causing organ damage and paralysis, among other things. But luckily, they did end up finding a use for these oils as machinery lubricant. But come on, this was the industrial age of America. There's gotta be a way to turn this perfectly good waste oil into something edible. If we could turn it into something edible, think of how much more money we could make. And so, Procter & Gamble started testing cottonseed oil in their lab. They wanted to turn this gunky, toxic, rancid, smelly seed oil into a food-safe product. They added some chemicals to deodorize, some hexane to increase extraction rate, some artificial color to make it seem golden-ish, like olive oil. And they pioneered this new magical process called hydrogenation, which turns thin, liquid seed oil into a butter-like consistency. And after years and years of R&D, they had perfected the process. The result? A new kind of fat, the world's first solid shortening made entirely from a once liquid plant oil. And they would come to call it Crisco.
I bake them a different pie for every special holiday, so I'm fussy about getting my crust nice and flaky. I've always used Crisco. All vegetable Crisco blends in evenly for light, flaky pie crust. Even the bottom has such delicate flakes, you can blow them away.
It was new, it was innovative, and since it was this hard processed extract made from all these different industrial processes, it was shelf stable. It could last forever on a shelf without refrigeration, unlike animal fats like butter, tallow, or lard, which meant it had outrageous profit margins, which meant it could be priced way cheaper than expensive animal fats. And it was made out of cotton seeds? Who in their right mind was gonna all of a sudden start cooking with cotton? Wasn't cotton reserved for shirts or dresses or napkins? Do you expect me to eat this? The public had been cooking with animal fats and olive oil in other parts of the world since, well, forever. How were you going to convince them to switch over to this new, weird, hard, solid thing? Well, you don't mention that Crisco is made from cottonseed oil at all. No, you just offer vague euphemisms like Crisco is made from 100% shortening, or Crisco is Crisco and nothing else, or that Crisco was strictly vegetable, purely vegetable, or absolutely all vegetable, or that Crisco was made from vegetable oil. Oh, so that's where we got that term vegetable oil from. Wait, is cotton even a vegetable? Oh, who cares? Crisco was new, cleaner, clearer, and purer than disgusting old-fashioned butter or lard.
Crisco's different from other shortenings and heavy-tasting oils. It's oil shortening with special protection against greasy taste. Best cooks use Crisco. You should too. Wouldn't use anything else.
In the public? Well, they ate it up. I mean, it only makes sense that Crisco is healthier than animal fats because look at how smooth and white it is. Taste how flavorless it is. Flawless. The beauty of modern food processing. Crisco flew off the shelves. In fact, it could stay for years on the shelves. It had a higher smoking temperature than natural oils, so it was better for frying food. And so in just 5 years, 60 million cans of Crisco were flying off the shelves and into the stomachs of Americans. That's 3 cans of hardened cottonseed oil for every American family. And while everyone was stuffing their faces with this hardened cottonseed oil, that graph we showed you a minute ago, it started to tick up. Doctors all over the country were noticing that more and more people were dying from heart attacks. And this was definitely not normal. From 1870 and 1880, Dr. William Osler of the famous Johns Hopkins Hospital reported that there were 0 cases of heart disease between. 0. And by the early 1900s, World War I Dr. Paul Dudley said, out of 700 male patients at Massachusetts General Hospital, only 4 reported chest pain, even though there were plenty of them over 60 years of age. 4 out of 700. But starting in the 1950s, having clogged arteries became more and more common. But the final straw was when President Eisenhower had a heart attack, and it threw the medical establishment into a frenzy. The public went into a frenzy, and they wanted answers. To you, the reason why was clear. The rise in heart attacks perfectly lined up with the rise in the consumption of your fancy new seed oils. But you couldn't let the public catch on to that. You couldn't let the medical establishment catch on to that. You were sitting on $1 billion gold mine. You needed to find a way to point the finger somewhere else. Luckily, you had the perfect culprit to point the finger at. Those disgusting animal fats that people have been eating since the beginning of time.
In fact, at the time, there was hardly any evidence for Ansel Keys' idea that saturated fat and cholesterol cause heart disease. There was a large study called the 7-country study on nearly 13,000 men.
I am presently engaged in a major experiment involving the health and eating habits of some 10,000 individuals scattered throughout the world.
Looking at their diets and following them over time to see who died of heart attacks or any other cause of death. What were some of the problems with that study? He went to countries like Yugoslavia, Greece, Italy, that had been ravaged by World War II when he visited them.
We are collecting data on all types, from African tribesmen to American businessmen.
And he avoided countries like Switzerland, France, Germany, sausage eaters, omelet eaters, high saturated fat diets, who also had really low rates of heart disease. He cherry-picked his countries to get the desired results that he wanted.
If you could convince the public that it was actually animal fats that were causing heart attacks and not this new concoction that you force onto the American public, you might have a chance of not only surviving, but also thriving beyond your wildest dreams. But how? How are you going to train the entire American populace to go against millennia of cooking with animal fats? Well, this undertaking would lead you to pull off perhaps the greatest propaganda campaign of all time, filled with fake studies and paid-off scientists, to where in the span of just 1 or 2 generations, the entire American populace would be hoodwinked into thinking that the most nutritionally dense food in the world is bad for them, while this? No, this is perfectly healthy.
American housewives had shifted over to seed oils because they were cheaper. Margarine was cheaper than butter. Seed oils were cheaper than any kind of animal fat for cooking. There was an economic incentive, but now there was a medical incentive.
From the beginning of the production, sale, distribution of vegetable oils, it was never about health. They promoted vegetable oils as healthy, but it was never about health. It was always about profit.
The best thing for us is to use the animal fats as much as we can.
We don't eat red meat.
You're not supposed to eat red meat.
But not too much red meat.
Must not eat red meat.
Red meat is for people who don't care how they look, not hot chicks like us.
Saturated fat has been vilified. If we look at the research carefully, saturated fat is not harmful for humans and actually has many healthful roles in the human body. So do not fear saturated fat for humans.
Welcome to Evil Food Supply, and this is the demonization of red meat. Every snack you find on the grocery store aisle is terrible for you. That's why we recommend carnivore snacks. This is literally the only snack we eat because it's literally just dried grass-fed, grass-finished beef with salt, and it tastes amazing. We've been eating carnivore snacks for a while now, and as we were making this video, we thought that they would be the perfect sponsor. So we reached out, and they agreed. Our favorite is the ribeye cut because, as you can see, it really is just an actual ribeye steak sliced up with salt. No cooking, no prep, just real meat with salt that actually fills you up, unlike other snacks. Which is why we love taking this with us when we travel or when we're out and about. One bag is made from about 1 pound of meat and can be enjoyed as a snack or replace an entire meal. They also have plenty of other bestsellers as well, including brisket, pork loin, and even Wagyu. But fair warning, carnivore snacks are a little bit on the expensive side. But that is because they use only 100% grass-fed and finished cattle here in America from regenerative farms only, which is not cheap. Compare that to beef jerky, which contains more sugar than a Reese's cup and is padded with tons of weight-adding fillers. Carnivore snacks is as clean as you can get. And from personal experience, it's gonna be really hard to go back once you try it out. And as a gift for the Evil Food Supply community, you can get 15% off your first order by clicking on the link below and using the code EvilFoodSupply at checkout. That's 15% off for using the code EvilFoodSupply. Thanks for watching, and let's keep changing the world together.
The facts are simple. You know the chief killer of Americans is cardiovascular disease, disorders and degeneration of the heart and blood vessels. Here are vital statistics. They show that this problem here in America is the worst in the world.
So, back in the 1950s, there was barely any research done on how diet causes disease. Kind of weird, right? people were more concerned about how to cure life-threatening diseases like the Spanish flu or scarlet fever, not how to prevent them from happening by eating a healthy diet. But when this one scientist, Ancel Keys, took a trip to the Andes in 1933, he noticed how the fresher air made him feel healthy and energetic, and then he started to wonder if food could do the same thing. He called this study human physiology, and it became Ancel Keys' obsession. And with all this heart attack stuff happening in the 1950s, it was kind of the perfect timing. Keys already knew there was some loose research on how cholesterol, the waxy substance found throughout our body, can build up in our arteries and stop our heart from beating, also known as heart attacks. And he knew that animal fats like butter, egg yolks, red meat, and lard were technically high in dietary cholesterol. So maybe people who eat a lot of cholesterol would be more likely to clog their arteries with it and get a heart attack. It kind of made sense. And yes, it is true that heart disease only started to rise after Americans started replacing their cholesterol-rich animal fat with processed seed oils. But whatever, he decided to test it out anyway. And so, Ancel developed a study that would change the way Americans eat forever. It was called the 7 Countries Study.
He looked at, Ancel Keys and his team went around and they looked at serum cholesterol levels and they looked at diet. And, Ancel Keys had gone into this study thinking, I want to prove my hypothesis. And he did, in the end, show a very weak correlation between saturated animal fats and your risk of having a heart attack.
Keys followed the diets of people from 7 different countries: Italy, Greece, Yugoslavia, the Netherlands, Finland, Japan, and the US. He wanted to see if the type of foods these people ate caused them to get heart disease. And the results were, honestly, a little shaky. He found that the men in the US and Finland ate way more red meat, cheese, and butter than the rest of the countries and had the highest cholesterol, which meant, to him, a higher risk of heart attack. And the people he followed in Italy, Greece, Yugoslavia, Japan, and the Netherlands ate a way lower amount of red meat, cheese, and butter. They mostly ate fish and vegetables and had a lower risk of heart disease. And to him, this was a revelation. He thought that comparing these 7 countries was enough proof that saturated fat from animal foods were the biggest cause of heart disease. And never mind that the men in the US and Finland had the most stressful jobs out of everyone in the study, and that Keys conveniently decided to study Greece during Lent, which is a period during the year when people don't eat any red meat or animal fat, just fish and vegetables. The rest of the year, the Greeks ate just as much red meat as Americans did. Anyhow, Keys gets the results he wanted. Yay, meat is bad for you.
For one, it only measured the diets of fewer than 3% of its participants, which is nowhere near a statistically representative sample. So it really didn't know what these people were eating. Number 2, it was the kind of study that only shows association and not causation. So it really can't ever prove that reducing animal fats was what caused the reduction in heart attacks. Number 3, it didn't actually show that there was a reduced total mortality. So people weren't dying of heart attacks, but maybe they were dying of something else. I want to share with you one particular other methodological flaw, which I think is really more emblematic than anything else, which is that it had to do with the islanders of Crete. So these are the people on whom the whole Mediterranean diet came to be based. Ancel Keys looked at the dietary records of about 32 or 33 of them. That's the total population he looked at. He went to this island. He fell in love with them because they were just seemed to him ideal. They lived this life of a peasant. It was a beautiful, unruined Crete, not the hyper-hoteled Crete of today. And that he went to Crete 3 times for a week each. And one of those weeks he showed up. Turns out he turned up during Lent, when everybody is avoiding eating animal foods. So he no doubt undercounted the amount of saturated fats that was being consumed by that population.
Why did he pick those 7 countries? Why didn't he pick more than 7 countries? 7 countries seems like a small number for such a revolutionary finding. Did he roll the dice, spin a wheel? Or did he pick those countries because he already knew that they would give him the results he wanted? Because here's the thing about scientists. It's that they're still human. They want riches like everyone else. They want respect and status, just like everyone else. And Ancel Keys was no exception. He wanted fame. He wanted recognition. He wanted to be adored as a hero for saving the public. So he purposefully fixed his study to guarantee the results that he wanted.
Ansel Keys comes in and does the 7 country studies, which is totally just looks at 7 countries in the world where they could correlate saturated fat intake and heart disease, and leaves out the other 16 countries where there was no association between saturated fat consumption and heart disease. So it was like this epidemiology, sleight of hand voodoo.
Epidemiology looks at things that are correlated. Many things are correlated. So here we find that the divorce rate in Maine is correlated with your consumption of margarine. So does that mean you should reduce your consumption of margarine to prevent getting divorced? That's what's called a false association. There are many things that are associated with each other.
Ansel Keys knew that the working men in Finland he studied already had a heart disease problem. That's why he picked that group. Ansel Keys already knew that Japan had extremely low rates of heart disease and a low-fat diet, which is why he made sure to include Japan in his study. But even though he very well knew that this study was a sham, he knew that no one would actually double-check his work. So Ansel Keys released his data to the public, and people were shocked. Meat is actually bad for you? Animal fats are actually bad for you? Cholesterol is actually the cause of heart disease? His study was so new and out there, the public immediately jumped on it. Newspapers started running articles on Ansel Keys' new diet heart hypothesis. Time magazine put him on the cover. And for the millions of innocent Americans who were worried about dying from heart attacks, the message was crystal clear. Eat a low-fat diet. And sure, some scientists called him out on his faulty research, but by then, it was already far too late. The low-fat diet was buzzing. People were excited about it. It was new, something the world had never seen before. It was totally based on weak data from a fame-hungry scientist, but who cares? No one looked into it. But one single study was far from enough if you truly wanted to change the behavior of the public for good. No, you needed more and more trusted sources to pile on. You needed the government's blessing. But lucky for you, the government was still scrambling to fix this whole Eisenhower dying from a heart attack thing. They knew they had to come up with something to explain why people were so unhealthy these days, and why heart disease rates were so high. So that's when the government turned to the American Heart Association. The AHA is a nonprofit that looks into heart disease. And when it was originally formed in the early 1900s, no one knew about them or cared, since no one was dying from heart attacks. The government barely gave you any money. But now, people were hanging on to your every word. They don't want to die from a heart attack? And that was the solution you were peddling? That's right, a low-fat diet as the solution to all these heart attacks. So everyone started throwing money at you. Since Eisenhower's heart incident, you were getting 40% more donations than you were before. In 1948, Procter & Gamble, the makers of Crisco, gave you $1.7 million in a radio contest, which is the equivalent of $17 million today. Companies like Quaker Oats, Kellogg's, and Frito-Lay gave your board members mountains of money to do all kinds of questionable studies on how their low-fat junk foods were heart healthy. Ansel Keys was on the board at the AHA and ran the National Diet Heart Study. So slowly but surely, the AHA started becoming one of the richest and most influential health organizations in America, and the government started to take notice. So you, the AHA, compiled this corporate-funded research into a handy dietary goals pamphlet with a professional logo on the corner. And when the government read your low-fat dietary guidelines, they were like, yeah, sure, why not? They modeled their own guidelines after yours. And in 1980, the American government released their first official dietary guidelines, and it was glorious. It started out as this, and it would later evolve into the food pyramid as we know it today. And as you can see, evil, nutrient-dense meat and animal fats were out, regulated to only a tiny fraction of what you were supposed to eat. And all these nutrient-void peasant foods like bread, cereal, vegetables, and all these new processed foods made with shortening, margarine, and vegetable oil were in. It could not have been more backwards. And yet, that's exactly what happened. The US government's food guidelines had been successfully co-opted by corporate interests through the guise of the American Heart Association. Now, if you were eating 11 slices of American bread a day, you were following the government's guidelines. But eat a steak? Ugh! What, do you want a heart attack? And it was the final nail in the coffin for animal fats.
None of the fat, a creamy, delicious taste. Fat-free cheese from Healthy Choice. Never settled for less.
Tastes too good.
Tastes too good to be, but it's not.
No way.
Way too good to be so fat-free.
Newest rich oven roasted turkey breast.
Tastes too good to be 97% fat-free.
Tastes too good.
By the 1980s, low fat had become the way of life in America.
Bad. Good. All your life you've been taught if something tastes good, it has to be bad for you. Continental yogurt tastes great, and it's good for you because Continental yogurt is non-fat, not low-fat, non-fat. So enjoy the great taste of Continental yogurt with real fruit. Continental non-fat yogurt tastes great.
And for the mega food corporations, business had never been better. Before, junk food companies had to use expensive fats like palm oil, coconut oil, butter, and lard in their packaged foods. But butter didn't last long enough on the shelf. And coconut and palm oil was getting slandered for being a bad saturated fat. Plus, with so much anti-saturated fat propaganda being shoved in our faces, the public was basically begging the big food conglomerates to come up with low-saturated fat alternatives. And the only way to formulate these low-fat alternatives? Shove a bunch of seed oils and artificial stuff into their recipes, of course. And for the food companies, this was like a miracle from above. Hydrogenated vegetable oil is cheap, shelf-stable, and, turns out, gives food a crispier texture. So swapping saturated fat for seed oils was a win-win. So all across the nation, snack food companies started to reformulate, replacing their animal fats and tropical oils with polyunsaturated hydrogenated vegetable oils made from corn, soybean, and cottonseed. Oreos went from being made with lard to being made with a mix of vegetable oils like palm and canola. McDonald's started frying their fries in hydrogenated soybean oil instead of beef tallow like they used to. And the hydrogenated part is important. The process of hydrogenation turns liquid oil into a solid. Raw liquid plant oils like corn and soybean go rancid fast. They burn easily when heated and, may we remind you, are so toxic that they're literally used as birth control in China. But once you harden it through hydrogenation, even a little bit so it's still a liquid, the oil will magically become shelf-stable. And the food companies loved this. Restaurants barely had to switch out their frying oil anymore. They could just use the same old oil over and over again. And companies like Nabisco could produce cookies that would last for months on the shelf. Yes, the 80s were like the golden age of junk food. And it would have only been possible thanks to this magic golden hydrogenated oil.
I'm so excited Snackwell's is now making fudge brownies. This tastes so rich. I can't believe there's only 2 grams of fat.
That's right.
So moist and chewy.
Will you please help me out? Those ladies could be here any second.
So rich, you'd swear they were right from the bakery. New Snackwell's brownies and snack bars. Try all 4 varieties.
And so, the Kool-Aid had been drunk. It used to be that the peasants ate cheap, nutrient-void grains because they had to. And they would look at the meat-heavy meals of the aristocracy with disdain. But now, the masses were willingly eating the cheap, profitable stuff all on their own free will. Everyone in America had been successfully duped into believing that red meat, butter, and eggs would make them fat and maybe even kill them, while they were unknowingly stuffing their faces with the very food products that were actually killing them. It was the biggest con in food history, and everyone was in on it. The government with their food pyramid, the American Heart Association with their heart-healthy checks on sugar cereal and fat-free candy, and the CEOs of the giant food corporations whose entire livelihoods depended on hydrogenated vegetable oils. Oh, and guess what else started happening in the 1980s? A sudden uptick in obesity. Looking at this graph, we can see that there is a sudden 8% increase in obesity starting in the 1980s. And this is where the real crisis begins.
Everyone knows that the best way to make chocolate milk is to add Hershey's syrup. But here's something you may not know. Hershey's syrup is virtually fat-free. And believe it or not, it's always been that way.
No. So, as the CEO of a snack food company in the 90s like Nabisco, Frito-Lay, and Kellogg's, you are swimming in money. You owe the insane growth of your company to the reliable, infallible, unexpirable hydrogenated vegetable oil. And you were riding this wave for a while, until...
KFC will start replacing the partially hydrogenated oil it now uses with a low linolenic soybean oil.
The Food and Drug Administration announced that artificial trans fats will be banned from the U.S. food supply over the next 3 years.
The ban will be rolled out in stores by 2018. Healthcare officials hope the ban will reduce coronary heart disease and prevent thousands of deaths resulting from heart attacks.
Yeah, that's right. The hydrogenated oils that you've been feeding to the masses for decades suddenly started to lose its glimmer. And keep in mind, the average margarine at this time contains a huge amount of trans fat at around 45%. So this was kind of a big deal. So while you were pumping out your trans fatty snacks, scientists across the nation were conducting studies on the harmful effects of hydrogenated oil on humans. One scientist named Fred Kummerow did autopsies of dead bodies in his lab and found trans fats lodged in the tissues, liver, arteries, and even the heart of the cadavers, concluding that artificial trans fats can't be metabolized by the human body, so it just kinda accumulates. Two Dutch scientists named Mensink and Catan found out that when people ate high amounts of artificial trans fats, their HDL cholesterol lowered and their LDL cholesterol would rise. And at the time, people knew that LDL cholesterol was bad and was the stuff that clogged arteries. And HDL was good and is used to make hormones. But wasn't it Ansel Keys who said animal fat raised the bad LDL cholesterol that clogs your arteries? So which is it? Seed oils or animal fats? There were more studies waiting. Around 1989, another study done in a Minnesota mental institution was published showing that patients who were fed a diet high on hydrogenated vegetable oil had a higher chance of dying from cancer than men who were fed natural animal fat.
What they did was they divided these 9,000 men and women into two separate groups. One group was fed traditional American food with at least 18% saturated fat and cholesterol in their diet. The other group got soft margarine, so seed oils, in place of their butter, whole egg substitute, low-fat beef, and dairy products filled with seed oils. You can pretty much think of Oatly with the canola oil in the plant-based milk. Here's the thing, both diets had the same amount of total fat. Total fat in their diet, a certain percentage came from fat. But the intervention group had half the amount of saturated fat and limited their cholesterol. What the authors found when they concluded this 4.5-year randomized controlled trial was that there were absolutely no differences between the two groups for cardiovascular events, cardiovascular deaths, or total mortality. It didn't make a difference. But one thing that they noted was that cancer was a lot higher in the low-fat group. And maybe most interestingly and kind of sinister is that this study was completed in 1973, but it wasn't published until 16 years later.
The data was staring you right in the face, and all these scientists popping up with their studies were really starting to get on your nerves. You did everything you could to fight back. When Kummerow proposed to the FDA that all food companies label trans fats, you and all your other CEO colleagues sent letters opposing it. Your argument? How could they know if the subjects in the study didn't already have heart disease or cancer? How did they know it was caused by the seed oils? You and your CEO friends even funded your own study to counteract Catan and Mensink, but the scientists came up with the exact same results. And so, your fate was sealed. You knew your trans fats were slowly killing Americans. You had to reformulate, and fast. So you knocked on the door of your oil suppliers, Cargill, Dow, and Unilever, and asked for a solution. Surprisingly, they were already working on trans fat-free oils years ago. Maybe to prepare for the coming storm. They gave you a genetically modified soybean oil that's low in trans fat. They also made a sunflower oil that was more stable and better for frying. And this seemed like a great idea, but these oils aren't hard and hydrogenated. But since hydrogenating oil raises the trans fat, it was out of the question. You need a thick, gluey texture to make that hard, plasticky icing on Pop-Tarts or to give your cookies a satisfying snap. So, to make up for the lost texture, you added in some emulsifiers and food additives to make sure your snack food still had the same texture as before. And sure, down the road it might come out that these things are poisoning the public too, but that's a risk you gotta take. And when the FDA officially banned trans fats back in 2000, that didn't really bother you either, because the kind agents at the FDA allowed you to still keep 0.5 grams of trans fats per serving. Yeah, that's right. And you could keep that little dash of trans fats in and still advertise your product as having 0 grams of trans fat. Yes, that's right. Trans fats that just accumulate in your body could be hiding in your beloved processed food right now as we speak.
I've gained 7 pounds!
I've gained 8! I told ya!
What? I put on a couple, but 7 pounds? How did I gain 7 pounds?
How did I gain 8?
I don't get it. I've been doing the same exercises. I haven't been eating anything different.
Me either. Wait a second, maybe it's that yogurt. No, that's 100% non-fat. Well, how else could this have happened? Well, maybe it's the Oreos.
Fast forward to today, and people are still terrified of meat.
Are you hungry? Yes, I just hope they have something I can eat.
What do you mean?
I'm a vegetarian.
You're a what?
That's how good this propaganda campaign was.
Ian is a vegetarian. He doesn't eat meat.
What do you mean he don't eat no meat?
Even though red meat contains way more absolute nutrients than vegetables, doctors will still tell you that eating too much red meat is dangerous. It can kill you. And yet, there are an endless amount of stories of people going on the carnivore diet, losing insane amounts of weight, diseases and conditions miraculously going away, and thriving on it without any issue.
Everyone that I talked to was telling me that I was compromising my immune system and putting my health at risk, but I made it the entire year without getting sick even one time.
I would say 70-80% of my body was a giant scab. And so now 2 months in, I would say I'm 70 or 80% healed. And the only thing I've been doing different is eating an animal-based diet.
And what's really sad is that the government, AHA, and big food companies are now backpedaling. They know that a high-processed food, low-fat diet makes people fat. They are literally the reason why the US is known for being one of the fattest nations in the world. But since they can't admit they were wrong and change the nutritional guidelines, they have to come up with a new solution. Starve yourself.
Can you eat healthy at a fast food restaurant?
Best thing they can do in those restaurants is order the smallest of everything. That the portion size is 90% of the problem. If they would eat a small hamburger, small fries, and a diet drink, or a salad.
So what should we be eating? We're not saying you should go full carnivore.
No, not exactly.
Although you can survive without carbs, it still can be taxing on your body. We'll cover this in a future video or newsletter. But the fact people have healed diseases on a carnivore diet could be proof that meat is nothing to be afraid of. In fact, quality meat should be something you actively go after.
Animal proteins, 4 to 8 servings daily. Cow, pig, chicken, deer. Fish, for sport only. Fish meat is practically a vegetable.
But if you're going to start eating more red meat, make sure you're sourcing it from a trusted local butcher. Most people will be able to find a quality butcher nearby. And you want to only eat red meat that is grass-fed and grass-finished. If it only says grass-fed, that's better than nothing. But that means the cow is still fed low-quality grains at the end of their life to fatten them up. And if you can't find a good local butcher, use a meat delivery service that sells quality, regeneratively farmed, grass-fed, grass-finished meat. White oak pastures is a good option, but what do you eat when you're on the go or you're traveling and you don't have time to cook meat on the spot? Well, we recommend a company called Carnivore Snacks, which, again, will be linked below. And really fast, we don't post often on this channel because these videos take a lot of work to make. But there's a lot happening with the food supply you need to know about in order to protect your health. So that's why we have our free newsletter. Every few days, we send you important updates, like how a supposedly healthy pasta brand contains dangerous amounts of toxic pesticides, or how Tylenol is derived from coal tar production and is linked to birth defects, liver damage, and even death. Signing up takes less than 15 seconds by clicking the link below. And we regularly get emails every day from readers about how this is the only newsletter they read, and that they forward to their friends and family. Sign up for free with the link below, and we'll see you in the next one.